Good afternoon. I get the dubious honor of trying to keep you all awake after the lunch. So hopefully I'll be able to do a good job. Full disclosure up front, I probably have too many slides, so I'm going to try to run through these. Questions, I'll try to make...
Full disclosure, I'll keep you on time.
I'll try to make sure that I leave a little bit of time for questions on the other end as well. So yes, a provocative title to start out with. And I think when we get into this, you'll understand why I titled it this way. And the goal of the presentation here and the conversation is really to think about things not from a defender's standpoint, but thinking about it from an adversary standpoint. And really the premise here is, as an OT professional, whether you're an asset owner like me or whether you are a managed service provider, what if your adversary knew as much about your systems as you do? Could you find them? Could you identify them? Could you stop them? Right? A knowledgeable adversary, think Bolt Typhoon, lurking in your system, living off the land. How would you detect that? Do your systems, are they sophisticated enough or have enough visibility to do that? So that's where we're going today. And hopefully the presenter works. There we go. So I'm not going to dwell on this. Andy Krapf. I am the Director of Cybersecurity for Loudoun Water. Water utility about 25 miles west of here, just north of Dulles Airport. Service about 350,000 folks, so we're considered a large utility. Both water and wastewater. We provide water to Data Center Alley, the world's largest concentration of data centers. They're our customers. I'm also the current co-chair of the Water ICS Cybersecurity Advisory Committee. And for the last 25 years, I have been heavily involved in the OT community. My previous position up until about 3 weeks ago was Director of OT for Loudoun Water, where I grew our program over the last 2.5 decades. So really the question today becomes, what if, right? What if an attacker knew as much about your system as you do, or more than you do in the case of an under-resourced or under a utility that has maybe no IT department or no OT department, right? This also applies to insider threats, right? So the idea of you've got a really knowledgeable person like me, right? Let's say one day I wake up and it's like, you know what? I could care less anymore. And I go into work and I do something really bad because I know my system's inside and out. How would you know that that was going on, right? That's the premise here. So to start out with, from an asset owner's perspective, and that's where I'm coming at this from, over the last 10, 12 years, we have been told as asset owners that visibility is our solution, right? We've been told by all the cybersecurity vendors, and I know a lot of them. I love the products that they have. They're really good foundations. I'm not knocking any one of them. But we've been told that visibility is the key, right? That's the bill of goods that we've been sold. But a lot of utilities, if you have visibility, they get complacent. Oh, I can see everything. My problem is solved. That is not the case anymore. Visibility is a gateway. It is not a solution. And I think a lot of the small utilities, especially in the water sector, think if they have visibility, they are all set. They're good to go. They've checked the compliance box and they've met most of the things that they need to do. And I'm here to tell you you're wrong. So knowledge is power, right? So when we think about it from an asset owner standpoint, there's 3 things that are really critical, right? OT process engineers, these are the folks that know how all the processes come together, whether it's large or small, right? Critical in-depth knowledge of how things tie together. Where do things function? What are the interlocks? What things are dependent upon other things? This is going to become really important when we get to the next slide. SCADA programmers, PLC programmers. These are the folks that are implementing what the process engineers are telling us, right? So not only do they have in-depth knowledge because they're learning from the process engineers, but they're also the custodians of the OT space, right? They know how to program their PLCs, how to configure their SCADA systems. They work with operations. They become a bridge between the operational folks and the engineering folks. Sometimes they are the engineering folks, depending upon the utility that you work for. And then on the other side of it, we have our OT systems admins. So these are the folks that are taking care of networks, communications, servers, workstations, firewalls, all the other things that are really critical. In a lot of cases, it's also encompasses cyber, right? So these are our three critical pieces that come into play when we're talking about our OT space. So this is where, as an asset owner, our knowledge lies. The parallel to this, when we think about it from a adversarial standpoint, we think about things like Sandworm and APT41, right? Volt Typhoon, PRC, all the things that are coming at us as asset owners. They are looking to have as much knowledge or more than those categories of folks that I just mentioned, right? Their idea is to lurk within our systems, to gather information, to go unnoticed, to effectively look like anything else that's happening on our environment, to do a couple of things. They want to really learn about what's out there. So in the pre-positioning world, that they can then decide what to do should they be asked to do so, right? So Sandworm, you're thinking about things like the Ukraine outages, physical effects that happen, right? They're really experts when it came to protocol manipulation. It's very, very strategic process that they went through for the Ukrainian outages. APT41, these are the folks that were working to get into things like systems integrator supply chains, right? To really get into things and harvest information when it came to, asset schematics, device configurations, things of that nature. Again, learning the environment. And when you see that, you're starting to think about things like SCADA programmers, right? And PLC programmers. They're mimicking that knowledge base. The Volt Typhoon folks we know are really adept at the living off the land and pre-positioning techniques, right? And they're looking to learn as much as they can about critical infrastructure. So not only the engineering aspect of it, but also the operational aspect of it. How would you go into a facility and disrupt that utility to maximize the effects, right? So there's a parallel between what your APTs are trying to accomplish and what your folks that you may have on staff or contracted with, that level of knowledge, right? One is trying to seek to have that level of knowledge that the asset owners already have. So there's two things in my mind that they're trying to accomplish. One of them is comprehension, right? This goes back to living off the land, right? It's that long-term lurking, I need to learn as much as I can about that system, right? How does it function? What are the safeties that are involved? Where do I manipulate set points from an operator standpoint? How do I get into this? How could I potentially modify things in such a way that they go unnoticed, right? We've heard that concept floated earlier today, right? They want to learn and understand the tolerances of your systems more so than perhaps the operational staff does, especially when you're not, in small utilities, they're not staffed 24/7 around the clock, right? They close up, they go home at night and rely on automation for monitoring purposes. There's an opportunity for unsupervised manipulation in a very subtle way that takes place over time. The other side of this, instead of comprehension, is effectively sowing chaos, right? Cyber physical systems have a kinetic function on the other side. So how can an adversary manipulate a system to cause maximum damage, right? I think of it as kind of a collapsing bag situation. If I'm an adversary, I'm not going after my network infrastructure because as soon as I do that, I lose everything and I can't manipulate the physical process. I'm going after those end processes first, do as much chaos as I can there, and then fold back until I get back to my point of entry. And then I sever that at the last moment. I don't want to sever my point of entry because then I can't do anything else afterwards. So we start to think like our adversaries do, and how could we cause maximum damage, and how much kinetic problem we can introduce into our systems. This becomes really, really important, right? That chaos factor. And if you can introduce enough of that in a utility of sufficient size or across multiple utilities simultaneously, you've really got a recipe for disaster. So some vectors of damage, they're pretty obvious, like mechanical integrity attacks, right? So if you know how to do these things, it's very easy to manipulate a pump or a motor, right? Motors don't like a lot of stops and starts, especially large ones. You can build up heat in the motor and then you can destroy it, right? So if you have a pump system that's out there that's only designed to start 2 or 3 times an hour, and you force it to start 10 times in 5 minutes, there's a good chance you're going to melt that pump down, right? So learning those systems as an adversary and how to manipulate what's in the environment is a great way to be able to do that. Years ago, there was the Aurora tests that were done at INL when they blew up the generator through cyber manipulation. It's kind of the same thing, right? Being able to do cyber entry to affect the programming to then cause physical problems. It's exactly the same thing. So in a water system, thermal spikes, pressure spikes, we've got things that require very specific temperatures. Josh Corman talked a little bit about water hammer. That is a thing, although there are some engineering tools or practices that are put in place to minimize that, but they still do happen and we still see them. Slam a hydrant off, you induce a pressure wave across your system. It's a very easy thing to do. And then there was conversation about chemical and process alteration, right? That happens on the drinking water and the wastewater side, right? Wastewater is a very complex process. It can be, and it is highly reliant on a variety of chemicals. So if you get that chemical dosage out of whack, especially some of the more volatile chemicals, you can cause a lot of problems. Now, to counter all this, Ginger will be happy that I bring this up. Cyber-informed engineering, right? Physical engineering controls can minimize the impacts, may not reduce them completely, but it can minimize the impacts of some of these cyber physical vectors that are out there. So there's definitely a lot of things that we can do. Depending on the scale, it might take a while to get there, but certainly for smaller utilities, it's a great path to go down. All right. One of the other things that we worry about for systems that are out there that have SIS, right, safety instrumentation systems, if those get compromised, especially for really sensitive processes, which is where they are, bad things can happen very quickly, right? They're there as a safeguard when the main process goes down, right? So if the SIS is compromised and then the main process system gets compromised, bad things happen very, very quickly. And the Trisis malware that was out years ago was a great example of targeting your SIS systems, right? So the idea here is that your attackers are bypassing logic to change your thresholds so your SIS doesn't take effect. And then all of a sudden now they can manipulate the process and really cause havoc across the process control system. And it's not just limited to water, obviously. Power is a really susceptible one to this, where they've got a lot of SIS systems that are out there. It can cause a lot of mechanical problems, believe me. Manipulating closed loop feedback systems. This is another one this gets more into the subtleness of things, right? So a lot of our process controls are based on, not to get too nerdy here, but what's called a PNID loop, which is basically we tell it to do something, there's feedback from it, we take that feedback, we adjust, and we send back a control that modulates that process ever so slightly. If you can get into a system and manipulate those set points or how that closed loop feedback system operates, you can make it do things that it is not supposed to do. You can start it to oscillate and just do weird things from a PLC side of it. So it's really incumbent upon understanding that process to be able to prevent those kinds of things from happening. It is also really based on sensor inputs, right? So if you have sensors, especially online sensors, that can be manipulated, right? So Purdue level 0 kind of processes. It's really hard to do because a lot of them are just hardwired, but there are some that are networked up that are susceptible. If you can manipulate those sensors and effectively do data poisoning, you can throw off your process. It is for utilities that don't have a calibration program, this becomes a problem because if you're not verifying your data that's coming in, your PLCs are going to do things that you don't want them to do. And it may be gradual, you may just get sensor drift over time, but it's something that the utility has to be aware of to have confidence in what is happening within their control system. And if you're an adversary and you can get to those, it's a very subtle thing that may not even show up because you're not modifying a PLC code. So if you have systems that detect code changes, modifying a sensor is not going to find that. So again, it depends on understanding your system and having as much knowledge. And if I were able to go in and do that, knowing my system, could my tool stop me from doing that, or at least detect that I'm doing that? Probably not. It's something that we have to address through policy and programs and other things that are out there. So the threat vector is real, right? And we know from phishing campaigns that the humans are the weakest factor, right? And that holds true even in the OT environment, right? We do things sometimes that we should not do, like share credentials. They show up an awful lot in utilities. Contractors, right? We allow contractors to come in and do things because we don't have enough time for people to do things. So oftentimes utilities will contract, especially in a region, the same vendor that is comfortable in the water utility. They might have 10 clients in the area that they work with. So their risk now becomes the risk of 10 utilities, right? So if that SI gets hacked for some reason, now all those 10 utilities that are their clients also have risk. So contractor management and making sure that they only have access when they need to, hopefully their remote access, if they have it, is managed, certainly is important. Oftentimes, especially during commissioning, we tend to bypass parts of code. I have done it in the interest of configuration. For those of you who are PLC programmers, putting forces in your code is a great way to prove things. Please don't forget to take those forces out. And if you're jumbling code, take the temporary stuff out. Code relics are a problem. We have to be, we have to make sure that we take those out. Again, this is a tactic or a tool that an adversary could use. They could go in and throw forces into a system, and we may or may not know it if we don't have an OT monitoring system that's out there or someone who's familiar with that. They throw a force in, all of a sudden a process doesn't work, or a sensor looks like it's always on or always off. And all these things hold true for insiders as well, right? If I'm a disgruntled insider, right, as OT systems manager, let's say, and I know where all the bodies are buried, if you will, I can go and I can cause some real havoc. I know if I go unplug this one cable just enough, I can shut my plant down or whatever it might be. So people are our risks, right? Whether they're insiders or whether they're our adversaries, right? So limiting how they get in and what they can do, and then having detection capabilities to know what's going on is our challenge. So I touched on this, right? Integrators' risks are our risks as asset owners, right? Work with your systems integrators. They could be a vector for an attack, right? I have had vendors that have been compromised that fortunately have reached out to us and said, hey, we've been compromised. Check your things that we've worked with. Don't trust your integrators. Not that you don't like them, but don't trust them, right? put policies and procedures in place. I can tell you, we don't allow integrators onto our system, period. I've been called a Luddite for that, and that's okay. They use our equipment. They come on site. We watch them. We own everything that gets done, and they leave site. It's just how we do business. It's just good hygiene from our perspective. We don't let them use their own equipment. They put their equipment on my network. We flag it. We tell them to get it off our systems. Don't forget about things like OPSEC, schematics, PNID drawings, engineering drawings, specifications. How much of that is out in the open, right? How much does your adversary learn about your systems because you put out an advertisement for a plant upgrade that says thou shalt use this PLC, this network equipment in this configuration? We do it all the time as an industry. We need to get better. Do it under NDA, do it under some form of secondary level for qualified bidders. Doesn't matter how you do it, hide it somehow, make it so it's not publicly available. And do audits, right? Audit your vendors, audit your equipment, make sure you're doing that. So if there are rogue configurations that happen that you're unaware of, make sure you know what's going on, and if corrections have to be made, you put them in place. I think we all know what living off the land is. I think I'm preaching to the choir here. I included this just in case. Yeah, my big thing about living off the land, quite honestly, and again, I'm not going to dwell on this because I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions on the other end, is really my Where's Waldo analogy here. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to blend in, right? We all of us with kids, right? We've all played with the Where's Waldo books. But the idea is they want to hide in plain sight. They want to be able to go through our system. You know, if they have stolen credentials because there's insecure remote access, they've done their social engineering, right? They want to look like our systems admins. They want to look like our OT engineers. They want to be able to walk through our systems, to learn our protocols, to learn what our weak points are, to find our crown jewels, and maybe know what our crown jewels are better than we do. Little research I did. I don't know if I completely believe this, but public edge vulnerabilities, right? Things that are exposed to the internet, big vector, right? Probably the most critical that's out there. Because if you can't see it, you can't hack it, right? If you can't find it, even if you had, not that I'm advocating for it, but if you had default passwords or lousy segmentation, fine. If it's not exposed to the internet, it doesn't matter. We all know phishing, whaling, corporate spear phishing, huge vector for systems that are connected between IT and OT. In some form or fashion, that seems to be the vector that a lot of the attacks are coming through. In my last 10 years of doing things in the cyberspace, I've asked the question, how many people think they really have an air gap? And I've had a few people that have raised their hands, and I have pushed back and challenged them a little bit. And I will say that even if you're using USB to move things in and out of your network, you are no longer air gapped. So it is a vector. Again, systems integrators, movable media, right? Those are all really important things that we have to worry about. And now, as you have heard, AI is in the mix, right? So how many of you guys are familiar with the AI attack that happened on the city of Monterrey, Mexico? A couple folks. So if you haven't seen this, there is a great white paper that Gambit Security put out. Dragos also has a white paper on it. It is nerdly fascinating. It is super scary. If you read the technical details, it is very, very scary, because basically what they ended up doing is they jailbroke Claude. They made it do things that it wasn't supposed to do. And it's not that they found a new vulnerability, but they used it as an accelerant. So what would have taken days, weeks, months to do, they did it in hours, minutes. And it's, again, it's not that they really found anything new. They used stolen credentials and the prompting, which this paper gets into, it's really shows how they're breaking into systems using this, is very specific. And it just goes to the point that as defenders, we now have, it's not that we have an expanded attack surface, we have a much more porous attack surface because of this accelerant. And this is the new frontier for us right now. But if you do your basics, this has less an effect, right? Change your default passwords, get your stuff off the internet, it wouldn't have happened. So key points of defense. This is some old hat. Everybody knows this. Crown jewel analysis. If you have not done a crown jewel analysis, please do it. This is done in two parts. One is, what are my key processes in my plant, in my facility to maintain, to allow the minimal amount of processing to keep me up and running? So in a wastewater plant, what's the minimum I have to do to keep processing? Because there's some things I can shut down. Also from a crown jewel side, who are my key customers? What are my key supply chain pieces? That's part of your crown jewel analysis also, because if a chemical vendor is hacked and I can no longer get chemicals to treat my water, and oh, by the way, it's the same supplier that does all the surrounding utilities because they all use the same chemical, we're all out of luck. I can't just borrow from other utilities because they're in the same boat that I am. So that has to be part of your crown jewel analysis. That involves not just the technical people, but it involves operations. It involves logistics. It involves maintenance folks. It is not just a technical solution. Second one is controlling entities. And notice I didn't say people. So entities are people, credentials, devices. Understanding device behavior is just as important as it is understanding people behavior, right? Why did this laptop all of a sudden start talking to this PLC? It's never done it before. Why is it doing it now? Right? Knowing that that is abnormal is really important to understanding that if you have an adversary in your environment or not. Privilege cleansing is another thing we should regularly do. Do I have privileges that don't belong, that should have been removed? You know, contractors, maybe they had an account in our system. They're long gone. Let's make sure we remove them. Not too much I'm going to spend on this because I'm sure everybody knows this, but micro-segmentation is a good thing. Segment. Deny by default, zero trust, call it what you will. If it doesn't belong on your network, there's no reason to have it. Data diodes, next generation firewalls, always a good thing. And make sure you're doing, audits. Again, out-of-band audits. I will throw in there pen testing where you can, sandboxing where you can. All those things are important. In the water sector, we have OEA, which we have to do every 5 years anyways. So there are things that we do to make sure that we're in compliance, but all those things apply across the board. Behavioral analysis, behavioral indicators. Again, I touched on this real quick. Understanding behavior is kind of where we're heading, right? Because living off the land techniques are there. They're mimicking what's supposed to be happening anyways from an adversarial standpoint. So now we've really got to start looking at, why do things talk the way they do? Why are certain credentials accessing certain machines at weird hours, right? Those are the things that we need to worry about. So understanding behavior, super important, especially in the age of AI. Time to dwell. it's, again, I'm not going to dwell on this too much. We're getting longer and longer and longer, right? Bad actors are in our system. Honestly, this is probably a little bit of AI slop. I pulled this off the internet. I don't know if I believe the Times or not, but full transparency, I took a little lazy way out there. And then the last thing, again, I will emphasize, there are things that we can do to mitigate a lot of this stuff. So INL, cyber informed engineering, is a great place to start. Mechanical, electromechanical controls to minimize cybersecurity disruptions, super important. And I would encourage you guys to reach out to folks like Ginger Wright and Andy Ort, and the rest of the team at INL and West Yost to really dig into this. There's some really good stuff that's out there. So I know I buzzed through a lot of stuff real quick. And one time for a question. One. I'll ask you a question. Did I keep you awake? Okay. No questions. Ginger. Easy question. If there's one thing that folks could do, I've said this at other conferences and I will say it now, the water sector is very resource strapped. And I would say if you have the ability, if you're not in the space, if you're just in the cybersecurity space, reach out to your local water utility and find out what they need. Offer some help, talk to them. A lot of times, and I talk to utilities all the time, they don't know where to start. They don't know, a lot of them don't know what to do because they are either below the cyber poverty line, they're immature when it comes to their programs. A lot of times they just want to know how to get started. More often than not, their IT guys get this thing called OT shoved in their lap and they don't know what to do with it. That is the single biggest thing I hear. And they just need to know how to get started. And mentorship and mutual aid is a really important thing. And I think that all of us can do a better job at reaching out to those utilities. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy. Let's give him a round of applause.